having a bit of pain or discomfort in your hips and pelvis, particularly towards the end of your pregnancy, is unfortunately fairly common. And it's due to the growing weight of your baby, meaning that there's additional pressure being put on those joints, on your hips, on your spine, that they're just not used to, and so they have to adapt to that new pressure and that new weight. However, if this pain is particularly uncomfortable and if it's sustained, then it might be worth going to visit your GP or mentioning it to your midwife on your next appointment, because it could be that you do have something which is called PGP, or pelvic girdle pain. Now, this is something that is, again, unfortunately, quite common in pregnant women, and it can vary in its severity. It is a completely pregnancy-based condition, so once you've had your baby, it will go, but it can be quite uncomfortable and it can be quite limiting to a lot of women. So PGP is caused by a stiffness in your pelvic joints. It's caused by uneven movement in those joints as well, and it can be painful all around your pelvis. So you might experience pain or discomfort centrally, so right sort of like in the centre of your hips, but you can also experience pain in your lower back, either on one side or another, or on both sides. That pain can also be throughout your pelvic floor and also in your thighs as well. So it can be quite wide-ranging in where you feel this pain or discomfort. It tends to worsen when you're doing physical activity as well, so if you're walking, if you're climbing stairs, if you are doing something that requires you to stand on one leg. So for example, getting dressed. A lot of women who have PGP notice that it's really quite uncomfortable if they're standing on one leg to put their trousers on or to put their socks on. That can be one of the things that is a bit of a warning sign for this. So in terms of just general advice for how to cope with this particular condition, when you sleep, because obviously the advice during pregnancy is to sleep on one side, sometimes that can put that unnecessary uneven pressure onto your hip joints. So sleeping with a pillow between your knees can really help, because it keeps your hips in line, rather than with the knees coming together, the hips are slightly out of line. So having a pillow between your knees just keeps everything nice and in alignment. So that can sometimes help. And that transfers into your yoga practice as well. If you are practicing your relaxation, lying on one side, for example, having a pillow or a block between your knees can help to keep those hips in alignment. Sitting cross-legged is something that we often do in yoga. Now, this can be quite uncomfortable if you suffer with PGP. So a couple of alternatives for you. Either you can use a block or a pillow or something to sit on. So propping something just underneath your sit bones raises the hips up. Okay, and by having the hips a little bit higher up, you're relieving that pressure from them. So you might find that that does the trick, that makes it more comfortable for you. If it's still uncomfortable to sit in a cross-legged position, you can sit in any other seated position that works for you. So kneeling up, having your legs straight out in front of you. Just find an alternative that is more comfortable on your hips. There are always ways you can modify everything in yoga to make it more suitable. When you're in child's pose, you might again find it a little bit uncomfortable because the knees are quite wide apart, so that's putting some pressure on the hips. So you can actually just keep your hips a little bit raised up when you're in child's pose, just to alleviate that pressure from the hip joints. Another thing that can really help with this is pelvic floor exercises. So strengthening your pelvic floor will help to support the pelvis joints, and that's always going to be a good thing. We use pelvic floor exercises a lot in pregnancy yoga anyway. It's just good practice to be doing them. So this is all the more reason to keep up with those pelvic floor exercises, that lifting and squeezing of those strong muscles that hold all of your insides up in your pelvis, and also the releasing and relaxing of them as well, just to keep them in good working order. Using a birthing ball is really good for PGP as well. So we do use the yoga ball, the birthing ball, in a lot of the yoga sequences that are on here, but also they're really great just for sitting on when you're at home, when you're watching TV, even having one at your desk in work instead of a chair will just help to promote better posture. So you will find that your hips are in better alignment if you're sitting on a yoga ball, because you can't lean back like you would in a chair or on the sofa. And it also kind of encourages your hips to be in a slightly open position, but just one that's right for you. If you are using a yoga ball though and you do have pelvic girdle pain, it's a good idea to make sure that it's inflated enough so that your hips are higher up than your knees. So that alignment, again, like sitting on the block, will help to alleviate that pressure on your hips. So things to avoid both in yoga and in everyday life that might worsen the condition. So anything where you take your legs quite wide apart. Now in pregnancy yoga we tend to use a lot of these hip opening stretches, so just don't do it quite so much. So if we're doing a hip opening stretch, just don't take the knees as wide apart, just don't go as deep into the stretch. Anything that is working just one side of the hips unevenly, so a lunge for example, can worsen your pelvic girdle pain. So I would either avoid lunges altogether, or, as I said before, just don't go into the stretch as deeply, just take it easy. I think the key thing here is just to listen to your body, and this is particularly important if you do have PGP because there are various degrees of it. So it's important that you keep moving your hips, and we do keep working them, but at the same time don't push into any pain. Feel for that level of discomfort and then come out a little bit, so you're very aware of where your own edge is and how far you can go into a stretch without causing yourself any discomfort.